Port of Hood River. Are there any changes or modifications to the or additions to the agenda? Anyone?
I'm not fine.
Greg is gonna be here.
Greg isn't. Greg's in there.
Hi, Greg.
Hey, everybody. I've just got myself sequestered. I've
Okay.
blown my nose once and blown it 1,000 times today, so I figured stay out of everybody's hair.
Okay, Genevieve, is there anyone signed up for public comment?
There's no speaking. You have written public comment received in your packets.
Yes, thank you for all of that. It's helpful. Okay, then I can move to the consent agenda. Does anyone have any questions about the consent? Can I get a motion?
Madam Chair, I spoke to Ben earlier about the consent agenda. Just didn't want to pull it out of the consent, but item B is for Gregor. Any concerns with the sublease? I'm not fond of them, but any concerns at all due to the fact I want to set a precedent in the future for the board.
Yeah, no, and it's essentially just a 100+ square feet. It's for the
Right.
food truck there for dry goods. No, there is no concern. They're clear that it's not going to be subleased for greater than their base amount. So it's not like they're going to be fleecing another tenant on the port's dime. So they're going to maintain the same base amount they have. It's really just a grace that Ferment had extended to Grasslands when they were over in the Ferment building. Now that they've consolidated their spaces, their space, I should say, they don't have that same availability, but they do have extra space over in the Jensen.
And Greg, you do convey to our tenants that it is on a base-to-base situation. It's not a
Yes.
flat rate we're going to sublease.
Yeah, no, that's correct. Even in
Okay.
it's verbiage in the template lease itself that says sublease is up to the port's discretion.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
Okay. If there's no other questions, can I get a motion?
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as provided.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Not all in favor?
Aye.
Chair, aye, motion passes. Informational reports, Mr. Shannon.
Yes, so the bridge update, couple quick things. We're making good progress on the tree tribe MOA. We've actually got meetings set up with all 4 of the tree tribes, which was great. We're on our second round with Umatilla. And we've had initial meetings with 3 of them, and then we're having our initial meeting with Warm Springs on the 22nd. So making good progress there. The BO is moving. We're getting some focus from ODOT. We got some comments actually from them and FHWA, so those are moving. And then we've got the 106 MOA. We got some comments back from SHPO, and some of that's moving too. So, project keeps progressing and we're moving forward.
We signed a letter to the building trades.
We did. We signed a letter to the building trades. They're going to be supporting the project. We've also got letters now from Umatilla and Yakima. And then we've had some preliminary discussions with Nez Perce on getting a letter of support from them also. So that's
Wow.
And we're making progress on the progressive design build RFP.
Yep, we are. We're moving that along. Our intent is to have that progressive design build RFP out by the end of the year. All that contingent on all the discussion we just had the last hour of getting funding. But we are hearing very positive things out of the Washington side, which are very encouraging that we'll get the funding we need to do that. And then I really think that's going to be the domino that's going to start the funding coming in. And then you guys will get to join Mike in asking us when we're going to be done. So,
Go faster.
go faster. We're working on hats.
You need a t-shirt.
I'm gonna get him a hat that says go faster.
Mike, you mentioned earlier about when all the CFIs, I guess Jason did, and all the CFIs are all signed. At what point does the Port of Hood River lose responsibility for the existing bridge?
Not until the new bridge becomes operational.
Okay,
So-
so now that last 70
Say-
million,
no, wait a minute. Ask that question again. Please.
when does the Port of Hood River lose responsibility of the existing bridge?
Oh,
Yeah, not until. the
correct
new-
statement. Yeah.
But till the day it's tore down.
Okay, so with the $70 million at the end. So what guarantees us to have minimal liability that gets completed and removed?
It's part of the CFA agreements and actually the
But
legislation.
what, is there anything that triggers it?
What do you mean triggers it?
Well, far as if the funding doesn't come, the last $70 million, which a portion of that is $35 to $50 million of the removal cost. If that doesn't come, are we still out?
No.
The state, the way the legislation was written is it is part of the authority's responsibility to take the new bridge down.
Okay,
The
so then at
ultimate-
that point, does the liability and the responsibility go to the authorities?
Yes.
It transfers over.
Yes, it's their responsibility to take the.
So is there actually a trigger date that says, okay,
No.
2029, it's open and operational, but the
No.
bridge is still there? Okay,
But there will be tons of pressure from environmental agencies and everybody else to get that thing out of the water.
The biological
Yeah.
opinion
Yeah,
will tell
clean
you,
it
will
up,
tell
yeah.
you, that would, they will tell you.
So,
Thanks,
yeah,
Mike.
and, you know, we're looking at funding opportunities of can we get grants just to take it out? So, I mean, we're looking at every opportunity to get grant funding that reduces, you know, everybody's local cost.
We're looking at options of surplus,
Yeah.
you know, can you get
selling
any
the old
kind of
bridge, and
value out of that bridge?
Mhm.
Probably not much.
reusing it for something else locally. If there's a pedestrian bridge that needs to be built, can you take the old bridge steel and use it for that? I mean, just, you know, anything that we can do, things like
and the
that.
steel prices too.
Yeah, steel prices, depending on what the
Yeah, we've probably got lead.
Yeah. we do.
No question.
Just a little.
So anyway, we're making good progress.
Yeah, I mean, we really
We're
are,
cooking.
and I, you know, I'm excited, I'm hoping. Fingers crossed that this year we see the funding so we can keep going. I mean, I think the project is like right on that heater of you know, falling off and going, and hopefully we can push it over the head.
Great, thank you. I mean, again, I said it in the last meeting, I'll say it again, I'm just very impressed with all of the progress that everyone has made with this project, so kudos to everyone. Okay, presentation and discussion items, West Side Urban Renewal District discussion, Miss Abigail Elder. And Elaine Howard, is Abigail? Oh,
And
oh,
I'm doing my
okay, okay,
And the Zan man.
and Mr.
Hey, buddy.
Martin Miller.
I thought there'd be snacks.
You usually bring them. Wait a minute. So did I. Something's changed. You usually bring the snacks. You brought pizza before.
I think that's pretty fair.
That's why Abigail signed on. She heard that under her city council meeting and a renewal meeting.
So I'm here to do the intro. I'm Mark Sandmiller. I'm the president of the Hood River City Council and the chair of the Hood River Urban Renewal Agency. And we have members of the commission that are on the organization as well. So it's nice to see you guys and thanks for letting us come and take a few minutes.
Mhm.
Abigail and Elaine are going to do a presentation. I just wanted to be able to say that urban renewal is a great tool for helping cities like Hood River to build up the infrastructure that's so important. I think the waterfront district is a wonderful example of things that we can do with this tool, funding tool. And the next place that we think is going to be really important is the Cascade, West Cascade, right? So going from basically 30th Street to the freeway on Cascade, it's underdeveloped right now. It's just a whole campus waiting to be done, and the city would like to proceed with building a district out on West Cascade, and we're asking that you as a fellow organization, entity, find that this is a good idea as well, and join us in deferring the tax revenue for the life of that district to help build up the infrastructure in the district so that we can do good stuff. So.
Thank you, Counselor. And this is a little strange, like if Elaine is there, Elaine, you're behind me, so you'll need to chime in. We are.
I am here.
Thank you, Elaine. We're so lucky to be working with Elaine. You have worked with her on some projects as well, and just her expertise and her statewide knowledge. So it's been such a pleasure. I've learned so much from her. This is the first time Elaine and I have done this presentation together. We have just finished a feasibility piece, and so we're visiting all of the taxing districts. I think we have 6 or 7 of these little road shows to go on. However, most groups will receive an overview of what is urban renewal. You guys could teach a master class in urban renewal, so we're gonna skip those slides for you. And so if you can give me the next slide. We just have an overview of what our plan or idea is behind a West Side Urban Renewal District. Talk a little bit about the possible projects and boundaries, knowing this is still very back of the envelope. We are now starting a process of finalizing that, and we want to hear your feedback on that. What we have found from that feasibility study, and then kind of what our next steps are. Elaine, do you have anything to add to that before we go to the next slide?
Nope, that's great.
Cool. So there has been a lot of planning in the city of Hood River. Councilor can speak to that, been doing a lot of things. Urban renewal is really a funding tool. It's not a policy tool. It's not saying what we should do. It's a way to fund projects and plans that we already identify. So the city has 3 major plans that we seek to implement through urban renewal funding. The first and the most expensive is the transportation system plan. The second is the affordable housing strategy that the city adopted in May of 2022, last year. It's coming up on a year already. And the third is one that you're a partner in, and that's the Parks Master Plan, the multi-jurisdictional Parks Plan that includes the Park District, the Port, the School District, the county, and the city. So all of these pieces had significant public engagement. We audited those plans to see, are there areas where there was not public engagement or areas where we were missing key constituencies or questions we didn't ask. But we're really looking to use urban renewal to fund projects identified in those 3 plans. We're not going with a blank piece of paper saying, where do we want to start? We're saying we have already identified plans. Urban renewal can help us fund them. Next slide. So in those things, some of the sample projects that we have looked at or are considering, and council is going to get a chance to either bless this or give us some feedback. You can see there's a couple of projects in each of those plans. Transportation system plan. My favorite on this list, if I get a vote, which I don't, is the roundabout for Mount Adams Cascade. Like that, I hear about that all the time. Other items, as Councilor Zan Miller said, are really focused on Cascade. We know that Cascade is an area that has needs a lot of time and attention, particularly when we think about the historic highway opening up, cyclists coming through. I know you had a presentation from ODOT a couple of months ago that talks a little bit about what we might see. And we want to make sure those cyclists can pass safely through our community, that all modes of transportation are able to come through. We're jumping anytime.
Yeah.
Jumping ahead, so. Exit 62, like exit 64, right, is under a management plan and has significant issues that it's an intersection that could fail without significant infrastructure investment, and that's a piece to work out with ODOT. With affordable housing, we're really new at this. This has not generally been something the city has focused on, but it is such a critical need in our community that we feel a responsibility to take action. You know, we have a project, 780 Rand Road. That's where the city purchased land. We're working with the developer, hoping to build about 120 units of affordable housing. This is the really most nebulous part of what it might look like, but looking to have similar projects where we would have, again, rental units targeted for affordable housing. And then we hope to have a project that would have owner occupied units. How many units and how that might look would really depend on what land we're able to access, what, maybe we can incentivize developers. We don't really know what those projects would look like. We just want to make sure that we have funding tools when those opportunities come up.
And we know land is not getting less expensive.
Oh,
And
man.
so, we see acquisition stuff, through this list, and that's really, how do we find the fiscal tools to acquire the land for open space, for potential partnerships that'll do housing, and to make the infrastructure be what we hope in the infrastructure, right? Much like we've done on the port.
And I'm embarrassed to say I have a typo up there where we have land acquisition development for rental project number 2. And project number 2, I'm gonna say project number 1 and project number 2. Red holes are one owner occupied. And then the third one is parks and trails. Really want to take this comprehensive look and just not say we're just building infrastructure or we're just building housing. We're building community. And so one of the pieces that really builds community are those open spaces and trails, parts that really can pull people together. So these are projects that are identified in that multi-jurisdictional plan that we think might be a good fit for the West Side area. Well, next slide. So the piece there on the left, the feasibility study is the part we have just wrapped up. We've been working with Elaine since December to make those estimates of and assumptions of what we might be doing, what the historical trends might look like, and what the timing might look like. Last council meeting, council gave us staff direction to go ahead and start working on the actual plan and report. So now we start fine tuning those numbers and pulling those pieces together to see if we've got that right. Elaine, do you want to add anything more to that process piece?
No, the feasibility study was just making sure that we knew a ballpark of the amount of tax increment revenues that could be available over a specific time period. And to compare that, and we have a couple slides in here that give that information, to the potential projects list to make sure that creating an urban renewal area is an effective way to help fund some of those projects. So that was what the feasibility study was about, is just matching needs to resources and saying, will this work for you? And our answer was yes, it will.
Thanks, Elaine. Elaine, do you want to take the next 2 slides where we talk about project costs?
Could I ask a question on your feasibility study? Are you trying to target for a date that you'd like to have these new housing in place? And if so, what's the driver to that and what's the date?
I think in our working assumptions, and Elaine, please jump in. We had kind of a really broad, what would the first be in the first 8 years, and then years 8 to 15, and then years 15 to 25. So the idea that perhaps in that housing piece would have maybe one in that first decade, and the second decade, and the third decade. So I don't have any specific timelines.
I don't know if it would help you or hurt you, but with the new bridge, we're gonna probably peak out in 27, 28. And probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 to 200 people that will be an influx into the community, the workers on this bridge. And we're going to need housing for them for probably on an average of 2 to 3 years. And that's coming at us. That's real.
Yeah. That's good information. Thank you for that. That is pretty universal. I mean, I think we hear from employers and just, all around town, the need to recruit and retain workers, not just affordable housing, certain income levels, but I'd say attainable housing, right? The school district has trouble keeping teachers. We have, a police officer moved away to, wanted to buy a house, was ready for that time in his life, and, we couldn't keep him here, so.
Well, what I'm
we're gonna have
kind of
those issues.
thinking about here is if you've got like a 20-year plan,
Yeah,
okay. A lot of these workers are gonna need, or they're gonna bring their RVs in.
Mhm.
Okay, so if you would buy the land and put in temporary facilities, if you will, for RVs as phase 1, they could help generate revenue for you for a period of 3 years, 4 years. They're gonna go away. And you have that revenue that you could start to generate and use for further development of that land. Especially if you're thinking about, phases, phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. The revenue could be helping you with phase 3. And it also helps us.
That's very innovative. I'm taking lots of notes.
There's nothing on the table on that.
Yeah.
Never.
Never, right, exactly.
Thanks. Yeah, the next slide. Thanks, and Elaine, can I turn this over to you?
Of course. So the city divided potential project costs into different buckets, and those buckets are, as Abigail said, transportation, which is the most expensive bucket of about $48 million. And then to housing of $23.3 million. Parks and trails at $9.6 million. And then administration over the life of the plan at $6.5 million. So those are the projected costs of projects over time. So over the time period of the area. And then the next slide goes into the projections of the financial capability. On this chart, I'll walk through each row so that it's understandable. Net tax increment funds or tax increment financing, TIF, would be projected at, and this is for a little over a 25-year time frame, not much, like $2,000 over. So a 25-year time frame. So the net revenues that could be expected to be generated given input from the city on both the allowable density to be built in the area and the expectations of how quickly that area could be built out if infrastructure was in, is $186.6 million. That net TIF is the total amount of money that includes the row below of maximum indebtedness, but it also includes interest on debt over the time period that the urban renewal is operating. That interest on debt by statute is not part of the maximum indebtedness of your area, but it's still money that is taken through the division of taxes from the other taxing jurisdictions. So the maximum indebtedness number could be, again, this is just feasibility study information, could be $160 million. Maximum indebtedness is the total amount of money that the agency may spend in the area on projects, programs, and administration. When we take that maximum indebtedness number that's over that 25 years and bring that back to capacity in, this should be 2023 now, 2023 dollars, that would be $103 million. So as Abigail said, and as you know from the waterfront area, urban renewal starts out slower in the first few years and the income increases as the area grows. So in years 1 through 5, the capacity to do projects is about $6.7 million. 6 through 10 is 21.5, 11 through 15, 26.1, 16 through 20, 25.9, and 21 through 25, $22.8 million. So there you can look at, the frustration always is when you do an urban renewal plan, you do it because you have immediate needs and you know that you'd like to go out and buy a bunch of property and you'd like to put that infrastructure in right away. But it does take time to start getting the revenue to be able to actually do those projects. Next slide.
Great. So as we work through the feasibility piece, we have not decided on what the boundary is or exactly how big the district would be. This was kind of our working sketch. You can see the red line is the city boundary, is the current city boundary. However, the blue area is all within the urban growth boundary. It is our assumption that part of this district will include the unincorporated areas. Might not look exactly like this, but this gives you an idea of where we would be. The city, when it has done previous urban renewal districts, they were 100% within the city. And so the city didn't need permission from any other agency or taxing district. Because this one would include unincorporated land, we will need the county's approval. And they're aware of that. We'll go back to them probably when the plan is finished in the summer for approval. Next slide.
I'll do this one again if you want.
Thanks, Elaine.
So the acreage and urban renewal in amounts are limited by statute. A city of your size may have up to 25% of their acreage and their assessed value in urban renewal. So the acreage of the city of Hood River is 2,180. The 25% limitation would be 545 acres. The Heights Urban Renewal District has 96 acres. And the existing waterfront, which is scheduled to be closed soon, has 109 acres. The remaining to use in urban renewal is 449 acres. So that assumes that the acreage from the waterfront district goes back to that limitation, and that the Heights district will continue. So that's the amount of acreage that's left for the city to put into urban renewal areas. The slide before of the proposed West Side area is 445 acres. So if indeed the city used that entire acreage, there would be only 4 acres left to be able to allocate to any future urban renewal area or to expand the West Side area in the future.
And because you're experts in urban renewal, you might say, but the city also has a Columbia Cascade downtown urban renewal district. That's not accounted here because it no longer collects. That district is still open because the city has some dollars to finish projects, most notably the 2nd and Oak intersection. But it no longer is collecting dollars, so it does not calculate into those numbers, number of acres.
Can I ask a question really quick? So this was brought up to me, and this is a question probably for Elaine. Not my idea, but I thought it was a really good one. Is there a way to phase this new district, this West Side district, which I fully think is needed and support, in two tiers pretty much, which would then allow, because it is a 20-30 year plan, which would then allow us to keep the waterfront open for maybe 5 years. It would allow that waterfront tax increment base that we're currently collecting. I think it's, how much are we collecting annually for it now?
Elaine, they
Elaine?
might know that.
I wasn't expecting that, but I I think the overall tax increment is somewhere around 800,000. Is that right?
Yeah, I thought it was around there. I thought it was a little under $1 million. So,
Yeah, I
so
think
that would allow the tax increment to continue to occur. It would allow the port to complete some of the infrastructure projects, possibly on lot 1. And then it would allow a tiered approach for this West Side plan to maximize the eventual 445 acres. And so you don't have to answer that question now, but I'd like to put it on the table. Because that would be easier than closing the waterfront down and reopening a smaller district. We would just extend it. And then it would still allow us to utilize the entire 445 acres just in a tiered approach.
The agency has not yet wrestled and provided a recommendation to council for the number of acres. My personal opinion is that we should reserve, we shouldn't take the whole 445. We should reserve some to allow a healthy discussion about lot 1 and stuff on the waterfront. And we should reserve enough to have wiggle room in the next 25 years. I mean, it doesn't have to be tons of acres, but we should not write ourselves out of being able to be flexible and do a smart thing here. and
Yeah,
there,
especially
right?
since it's gonna take you 25 years to develop all 445 acres.
Right.
And takes all the flexibility away from you.
Right, I mean, so the trade-offs are, you want it to be big so that we can use this funding to get, roadway acquisitions between May Street and Wine Country, there's important connections that we want to pull in. While not cutting off our options for stuff like down there, right?
I just wanted to kind of that was a new idea presented to me and I thought it was
Yeah.
interesting enough to maybe put it on the
Yeah.
table of a tiered approach.
Are there clever ways to make sure that we have that flexibility?
Let me just add one comment to that question, which is if the waterfront district did stay open, they would have to do a substantial amendment to increase the maximum endowment. And a substantial amendment is the same process as a new plan. So you have to go through all the same steps. The difference, and you would have to identify those projects on which you're going to be spending money. So it's actually the same process. The difference is the existing waterfront district is generating money, so that money would come in. Whereas if you formed a new one, that money gets used as a repayment to potentially the port or a developer or someone who's actually expending the funds.
Elaine, something you just said reminded me of the timing of this, I think is important as we think about the districts that have foregone taxing or, you know, some of their general tax revenue over the last several years, decade, to as waterfront has been created, hoping like that coming back on the tax rolls would soften any blow that they might have with West Side now not coming off, but them not getting that increment funding in the piece. So these two feel very linked. So what you said about like tiering so that they would have a smooth transition would be really, whatever it looks like, the smooth transition is important.
At the last agency, remember, we talked about a single owner new
Single person.
district that becomes very much simpler. And the fact that the port owns, you know, all of lot 1 and lot 900 and lot 1A makes us a sub district. And Elaine, is my recollection correct?
Yes.
So there's things we can do, right?
Yeah. Nothing off the table.
Right. Great, thanks. And I think we're pretty close to our last slides. We have the next slide, please. One piece as we are working through this is that's been really important to city leadership and city staff has been a commitment to equity. In some places around the country, urban renewal has had great benefits, but at great cost to some communities. And we wanted to be truly careful and intentional, recognize that there are folks who live in the West Side now, that some of our naturally occurring affordable housing happens on the West Side. Once we unlock parcels, we don't want folks to be displaced because things became very valuable very fast and we didn't think ahead of that. So you can see we've got some overarching principles. And as we think about all of these pieces, trying to build in a real intentional view of who's going to benefit, who's going to be harmed, how can we mitigate those harms, where they're going to occur. Any change is going to result in some harm. And so how can we be thinking about that? And then, like I said, as we look at the plans, we've done an audit of who participated in the transportation system plan, the parks plan, and the affordable housing plan in the past. And are there folks that got missed or need to be revisited and questions that we need to answer? So that's process rather than the final result, but it's really important that we be incorporating equity in all of our decision making. And then finally, just kind of where we are. So we are, like I said, we've wrapped up the feasibility piece, got the go ahead from City Council to work on the plan and the report. Our goal is to have that finished by the end of September. And the reason for that is then we can freeze property values and start collecting the difference, the increment funding in the coming year. So we're on a fast track. Elaine assures me that we can do it. Because sometimes I step to doubt, but this is our kind of first talk with you. Definitely want to hear your feedback and comments as we go through this process. In the memo that was part of your packet, you've got a lot more detail and some pieces about how it applies specifically to the port, because you are a taxing district affected by this. And then when we have, Elaine, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when the plan is in its draft, pretty substantial draft form, we'll distribute that to you and you have an opportunity to provide comments at that time as well.
That's correct.
Great. And I think that's it. Any questions or comments, thoughts for us? Definitely want to hear your thoughts.
I just have a question, and some of it
might be included, it's not UR specific, but when I hear these presentations and when I hear people talking about it, it's affordable housing, owner occupied and rentals, and that's all I ever hear about. I agree, it's needed, it's appropriate. What I never hear about is this gonna require another elementary school, and has the school district committed to building it on their property on the west side? Is this gonna require another fire department, and has the city committed to building one? I never hear about those, and it's probably something you discuss all the time, but I'm curious. Are those things going to happen?
Or is this gonna, I mean, will it affect the population enough to worry about that, or is it just helping us with the current
I
population?
don't know, how many houses and how many families, and I mean, I don't think Westside could take another 500, I don't know,
Right?
I'm just curious.
Yeah, and I think we think about population growth and kind of where, our assumptions of like where we think growth would happen and what that growth might look like. But it'll definitely have to be an iterative process. I've had a conversation with the superintendent about the property that they own there. Is that the right location for a future school? What demographics are they seeing? It sounds like in the time that they purchased that property 5 years ago, longer than that, that their enrollment has been falling. So, what kind of decisions they'll be making and where enrollment will shift. But yes, absolutely. I had that same conversation with the community college the other day. Do we have any population estimates? The other piece was that you mentioned fire station. As that area becomes incorporated into the city, it's withdrawn from the West Side Fire District. We're presenting to them next week. Thinking about what does that mean when West Side's area changes and the city assumes responsibility for that? Those are big questions that we have to.
We have talked about it at council level. Chief Damian has presented just basically how do they respond now, which is, overlapping response kind of thing. So, he considers, fire and police as well. It's already an area that they consider in their immediate response. So, and the city, as the city grows, is there an FTE increase for
Well, as soon as the district, as soon as they go to build a new school, you know exactly how that's gonna get, there's gonna be an ask for funds there as well, so that's where I started wondering.
Yeah, and school stuff is a great question that we on council don't,
Right.
those lanes seem to say separate.
I will note, since we just talked about schools, I said we're talking to a bunch of different taxing districts because they will forego, when and if council implements this, they would forego that tax increment funding. School districts and other education related groups are not, they're not harmed or changed by that because education funding is, what's the word? It's
Equalized.
Equalized, thank you, Linda, equalized at the state level, so they would
Yeah,
still
but-
get whatever they get, but then
With-
additional
with
levies or
that-
bonds.
Yeah, with that thought, though, sometimes the state doesn't consider that we just added a whole new subdivision,
Mhm.
and we're gonna need more education instead of less. So I think that's a great point. We need to look at this thing holistically, not just one component of it.
Taxpayers of this county will have to fund a new school just like they have in the past, and so it has to be part of the conversation. That's just why I asked that.
For sure.
So all this property is privately held, right? And it's gonna develop. To me, the question is like, can we help development that's gonna happen in a way that's organized, right? And unless we're in there first building the roads and defining the parks and stuff, it's gonna develop in the way it develops. And so this funding source is the tool for us to try to have a community say in how some of those things work out. So, well, that's how I see it.
For sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions?
I think Greg might have one if you're.
Yeah, Greg, go ahead if you had a question.
Yeah, thank you. Out of curiosity, do you expect the unincorporated area of the proposed west side to eventually become annexed into the city boundary?
Yeah. You mean the folks that we think would be in the urban renewal district, but outside the city?
Yeah, the areas that you're showing in the unincorporated
Yeah.
areas, just,
Yeah,
is there a timeline that you presume for that? Because I would imagine that would have an effect on your overall total amount that you assume that you could acquire through the tax base as they come into the city. The city boundary, I would assume. Which would also have an effect on your percentage of your urban growth area. If you have 25% of your overall, as your city grows, the overall scope of your urban growth area would grow in tandem, I would assume.
That's correct.
Right. The first piece I'd say about the annexation, so I think in 2016, council passed a resolution that if you wish to connect to city sewer, you need to annex into the city. So that's been the major driver of annexation, of voluntary annexation. At this time, council's not had the direction of bringing folks in or trying to do kind of wholesale annexations. Now, that could change, a policy change by council, but that's not been the current direction.
Right, when we annexed the new development of Belmont as it goes north-south. To be, adjacent properties, a few of the other property, lots in Adams, I don't know what the name of that, Bow Edition. Came
St.
in as
Charles
well to
Place,
be able to
yeah.
connect everything up, so. You can't have an island with annexation, so that would be the case if there was an application to be annexed. There was an island, we would, using the way we've done it to date, we would add other properties as needed to make it contiguous, so.
It just came to mind as Commissioner Fox was talking about a phased approach, and if you are incrementally expanding the overall area, then theoretically there are 444 acres that you're able to deploy that will grow. And so when you think about only leaving 4 left at this point, if you're growing that, then maybe there is some opportunity to maintain some of the waterfront as you guys start to grow. And so, yeah, it's just thought came to mind. So I appreciate the answer.
Okay, good. Thank you
Thank
for your
you so
time,
much
both.
for your
We
time.
appreciate it.
You know how to reach us. This is one of our major efforts for the next, next 6 months. So now is the time we definitely want to hear back from you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Daryl, you want to talk about the marina?
Well, yes. Hello, commissioners. We put together a scope of planning of what we need to work on for the marina redevelopment before the construction project starts. It was one of the directives from the last meeting, and you all put a lot of emphasis on go time. So Kevin and Mike and John and Greg and myself all contributed to this list. And what we need to begin with is, we're identifying what tasks we think need to be addressed prior to the project. The next step after that, we'd want to identify which of those tasks HNTB they're currently working on, and then which ones are not part of the bridge replacement. So we've started on that. And then after that, we would want to take a look at whether HNTB could do those tasks separate from bridge replacement via a separate work order if needed, or if the port should do planning on its own to start working on those things in coordination with HNTB. But the big thing that we really want to focus on tonight is the port office and the relocation of that, because that's something that's going to take time and we need to get going on. So we are seeking commission input on that. And this memo it's got my name on it, but it involves Kevin and Mike and everybody kind of chipping in of finding out if the commission is ready for us to start moving forward with that. Because a lot of these things, HNTB is already diving into the 6F, the 4F, all of that, but the moving of the port office is what we've got to focus on right now.
Let's break this into two, if we can, two different things tonight. Number one, this is a good start. If there's anything commissioners would like added to this, can we have them email you? Like when I look at this, I say property acquisition, not only property lines, but can we acquire some property here that isn't ours? So things like that, can we have the commission email those to you and help develop this document and then discuss what you just asked tonight?
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Because, things like that. Because we don't need to dive into specifics of each and every one, but commissioners have certain items they'd like to talk about there, and then we can discuss just what you want to tonight.
Right.
I'm just adding one more thing on.
I think that's great.
If I
And so
could-
Kevin, if you could dive
Yeah,
in
let me
with
just-
the building.
Yeah, I think the main thing, there's a lot here, and like Daryl just said, Mike and HNTB is doing a good chunk of that, but really it boils down. To this building and the maintenance shop in the back. And frankly, if construction is going to be starting in what, fall of 26.
Well, I think we're trying to plan that it's gonna be in 25.
So
Now, that's the earliest. It's probably gonna be 26, but we ought to be thinking about early 25. So this is not a roadblock. And to me, the first thing that's gonna go in is lay down space and the working bridge going off the pier here. Which means this facility and the shed's gotta go someplace.
So it really comes down to, I mean, there's a lot here. We can, go and do a study to try to help with that, to get an architect to look at different scenarios. Or we can just sit down, take in a couple of hours, roll up our sleeves and try to just brainstorm amongst the commission and the staff to try to put together a list of, 10, 15 ideas on not just where this building's going, but the facility, maintenance facility workshop as well.
Do you need to be in the same building?
I don't think so.
Preferably not. We're pretty noisy. We run into trouble just working in the back shop here sometimes creating noise. So yeah, separation of those two I think is pretty important.
Okay, that's okay.
But John has to stay in the admin building.
Well, you guys are saying, I'm just, then that lowers the footprint that you can make an argument really needs to be, because I don't think maintenance needs to be
Right next door.
front and center, prime location. I mean, they can be wherever, a little more easily than admin. I think you can make a little bit more of an argument that admin probably, or could be.
The other thing that I look at too, sorry to interrupt,
No, you're
would
not at
be is, because, I mean, if we're looking at 2025.
Yeah.
Even if we identified a parcel of land, we had a design, we started to build, no way that's happening. So should we first be looking at temporary space? Where can we identify that we already own as temporary space? Whether it's up at the airport, whether it's in one of our existing commercial buildings, because it seems like the maintenance building shop, that seems like it has a more of a longevity here. As we're talking about lay down space and whatnot, it seems like that could maybe stay and be incorporated for a little bit longer than the actual admin building.
Yeah. I think the idea of building a port admin building doesn't make any sense to me. Build something else and put them in there. I mean, especially if we're talking about commercial land or somewhere close to here, it should be as a part of something else, which lends itself to a temporary location. And I think if we challenge Greg, he could come up with a couple ideas for temporary, meaning 5 to 10 years location, and then decide as we go.
So I almost would recommend that the court make a first cut at a decision tree. And the decision tree, you have one separate one for the port office and one for the maintenance shed. And start throwing out ideas of what you could do with this decision tree. And then that gives you a whole bunch of options to come in to talk to the commission about. And we could very quickly say, hey, I think that route's better for the long-term good of the port. I think there's an awful lot of homework you could do in a relatively short amount of time with a decision tree. Getting 3 or 4 of you guys together and just brainstorming. And don't worry about, the precursors to any of that. Where would you like to see it? And what makes the most economic sense?
Keep it simple.
Keep it simple. And I would urge you not to think about a Taj Mahal, but something very functional and maybe sizable.
One thing else to bear in mind too is once we lose that revenue stream on the new bridge, we don't know the future And we may want to consider looking at a temporary facility, see what our revenue stream is. And then address it according to our revenue stream.
It's a
We
great
may,
point.
we may segregate some of our assets off to other departments. And to have a big administrative building for what?
So along that line, I know Mike and I both have been on projects where. You have quads or super quads, office space, and they're all portable. You bring them in, set them up, and they've got everything. And you can either buy them or you can lease them. So if you have land. That's not gonna take a lot to really bring in some utilities. That's probably gonna be the cheapest way to go. And some of those facilities we've used on projects 10 years. Now, if they in 10 years, you take a forklift and turn them over and run over them and burn them. But they're not bad.
You know, just brainstorm real quick, Western Power may be a situation for the maintenance. Building and the portables are right next to it. Got a waterfront view.
About mobilization for emergencies on the bridge.
Mhm.
The intersection gets so jammed up. The benefit to our location for facilities now is that they can get right on the bridge when there's an emergency. If they were having to come from exit 62 or 63. So maybe within the laydown area, we could have temporary staging for our emergency response to the current bridge.
I think that's a great point. That's part of your decision tree.
Yeah.
And I don't want to throw out options, potential things here, but I know that there are temporary solutions that Greg perhaps is aware of and can research, and then staff could come back with some ideas there, because I do believe that they exist.
Well, and to Genevieve's point, we're definitely gonna need temporary emergency services because. As we're constructing the new bridge, we're gonna have to be able to respond to problems that they don't have to.
You can make that.
So I could
you can make that
certainly
part of the
see,
Contract.
yeah,
The construction and have, a lot of what DOTs do is within the area of the project.
Mhm.
The contractor is responsible for all emergency response setups,
There you go.
and all that can be made part of the contract.
But sometimes it's a welding repair on the fly on the current bridge, so.
Yep. Yeah. But there's.
And I know this is a marina planning discussion, which I don't know how the port could ever justify or afford or have the revenue stream to build some beautiful port specific building over by the DMV on that commercial land over there and ever be able to explain that to people around here. So I think that thinking is just not going to happen probably as part of a larger development. Then doing something temporary, perhaps coming back in the future after that is done and something is constructed there and being a part of that would certainly make sense, maybe. I think an argument can be made that administration needs to be close to their customers or consumers and to their properties. But I probably as part of a bigger development might make
Yeah,
sense.
also too, you might want to consider too, as a joint effort with county or something like that.
Mhm.
especially for the maintenance.
Yeah.
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 So the other thing is, do we have real estate right now that we're having a tough time leasing out? Does it make sense to take over some of that space? I mean,
So-
that's part of the decision tree.
Right, and Greg, you don't need to be specific, but go ahead is the answer. Yeah, you guys can look into that.
Yeah, we can look into it, but I also want to add that we are going to still ideally be a business where that public will need to access us. So working out of trailers might not be the best as we work with our tenants, but there also is a necessity for the commission to have a meeting space. So you want to make sure that you guys consider your seats and where the public will be able to have access to us during what we're sitting through right now. And so while we might be able to shoehorn ourselves into some
We do that
trailers.
all the time.
We could sublease the city council.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can do that. There's a, that, one thing in our advantage that we have a lot of existing property that we own.
Yeah.
So a minimal capital investment.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
One other thing, project related that we've started on is there's a right of way transaction that's gonna happen. About the facility here that we need to keep in mind that, the project is impacting this. There are project responsibilities related to that right of way transaction. That we're working on getting estimates and appraisals and things like that, that you guys need to be aware of, and we can. Update you on once we have some more information, but that is part of the project would be, there is a business impact here that we need to take.
And maybe that is what, in part, we need you to come back to us with as this is where we think. It would be smart to put administration in the future. That transaction can help perhaps, and if it is, say, as an example, over there. That transaction can help fund something over there, which probably should not be just a port building, could be something that starts. Over there, and that now we're at marina planning, starts over there, well, that's gonna take some time, you're not talking 2 or 3 years. Recommend something temporary, recommend something permanent.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think you can make this as big a study or as right-sized study as you want. Clearly looking out past the bridge construction, everybody's demobilized, moved away, and there's a somewhat of a blank slate here that you could leave some breadcrumbs for those future commissions to, hey, this is what we were thinking then.
Well, some funds, some actually tangible money as well to start that, because the project will need to compensate in part that.
Yeah, so remember in our estimate. We have an allowance, we don't know if it's enough, but an allowance to replace this building. Replace the shed, relocate it, and. If this area through here becomes a laydown area or a staging area. The project has an allowance to return it to its pre-state. Either we repave it. Or all of this goes into grass and lawn and whatnot. So there's money in the estimate for that kind of a thing, so we ought to be thinking about that. What do we want this thing to look like right here? After the bridge is built.
Yeah.
And that goes into the scope of work for the contractor, so. We kind of got to get that figured out because we're trying to award a contract at the end of the year.
So that component, is that something that would be an HNTB contract?
Yeah, I mean, that's anything that's impacted by the project, there's the responsibility of the project to, you know. Resolve, right? And we can put in the contract to whatever level we want to do that.
Well, okay,
There's costs
I'm gonna
that-
step in
there's
here now.
costs that are associated.
We got to be a little careful.
There is.
For HNTB to replace this building as the contractor,
No,
we're stretching it there.
yes.
So I think as far as planning, that's fine.
I think planning, I think how this gets done after. Is something that could be in there, but you're right, the building itself, where it goes, that kind of thing is outside of. But the impacts, what's left here afterwards, we could put all that.
And there is money in the estimate, doesn't have to be going through HNTB, it's our estimate. That says we've got X amount of money to replace this particular facility.
Yeah, some of the other items in this plan that we're not really addressing right now, but obviously the makeup of what the marina will look like. During construction, trying to figure out the 6F issues as far as the limitations of the use of the boat launch. You know, is there a way, if there's a 6-month, if the facility can't be used for 6 months, that's considered a take. Can we take that 6 months and split it up over the course of the construction project? Those are all issues that we don't know the answers.
I believe that issue is squarely with HNTB. It's part of their contract,
Bring it back to us.
and we got to get that solved.
Find all this stuff out and bring it back to us.
Yep.
With a recommendation on the next 5 years and then the next 30 years. I mean. But it sounds like something a little more temporary is gonna be.
Yeah, and I would really encourage you, time is of the essence of this structure and that structure.
Yeah, this is, I mean,
That's what you ought to be doing first.
Yeah, I mean, the contractors gonna wanna get in here, get set up, and, I mean, there's. Other opportunities we've talked about, you could lease this facility to them as their field office for a period of time. Right, because they may not tear this down until they do some of that, so you might get a year's lease out of them. You know, while they're doing design, and have them in here for a year, leasing this facility from you, right? And then once construction started, they can move it out of the way when they. get
But
to
the
that
shed
point.
is probably gonna have to go
The
first.
shed's probably something that's gonna go first. They're gonna get out there and start getting some of that prep while they're doing, you know, design, but. I mean, there's a lot of things, but getting out of here and finding a new place is like step number one to make it happen.
Well, I agree with what Kevin said. I think that, we don't know what we don't know as far as the employment capacity of the port after all of this is done. So planning a building, a facility that houses the current staff that we have now, I think we need to look at something more temporary and then.
Very
See how
helpful
the cards
feedback. Thank you. We'll put together some ideas. We'll do some internal decision tree concepts. If you have ideas that you would like a staff to consider, just shoot me an email. We'll work it into the mix. And then staff can work on that aspect of it, and then HNTV and the port can work on some of those technical planning issues that you're already working on to some degree.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Daryl, anything
Thank
else?
Okay,
Thanks.
let's see here. Kevin,
Let's see, just a couple of things that weren't in the weren't in your document. So I think you got you did get the rate resolution. So that is something I did want to bring your attention to, is this idea of bringing all of the rates and fees and charges of the port to the commission at one time. So what's in your packet is a first draft. It's one that that staff has been starting to look through, introducing possible new fees that maybe other ports have incorporated, but really having a comprehensive document for all of the rates, fees, and charges that the port assesses really needs to come through the commission, hopefully once a year. Obviously, there's going to be one-offs that will need to come to you, but just wanted to get some feedback from you on that sample resolution. Does that make sense the way it's formatted? Are there anything else in there that you'd like for us to include as we start to fine tune it?
I'll give you. I thought it was a great document, and I understand the concept and I agree with the concept. I felt the document was short on giving me enough information to be able to say, yes, I agree with all of this, carte blanche, go for it. What I'd like to see, if you're going to propose this is a new rate, what was the last rate? And what kind of percentage increase are you looking at? And then probably a discussion on some of them. Why did you bump it by such and such?
Or
What
justification.
justifies it? What comparisons did you make? And more importantly, how did you get any kind of feedback from the public before you bring it in?
Sure. Using our committees and other working groups to
Right.
bounce the ideas off, just so they have.
So we know
Yeah.
we're gonna get a lot of flack
Yeah.
on this one. You're not gonna get a lot of flack on that one.
Yeah,
a good idea.
I think I'd also like to see how it's working towards self-sufficiency, kind of to help the justification for the bi-state working group.
Will we see something like that in the document you mentioned earlier tonight, or I was talking about, that'll have? Here's where our expenditures are on each area, and here's our revenue. So we should be able to tie that right back to this document, right?
yeah. So our hope is, do you want to take a?
Well, I don't know that it will tie that. I haven't actually seen this document, so I need to get in there and get into that. Genevieve was kind of the lead on that. And I can actually, we did a schedule like this at the city of Tigard that had the current rate, the new rate, and what the percentage change was. I can get you guys examples of that. What we're going to, or what our intent is to bring on the 21st with more of just here's how much revenue came in, more of a profit and loss type statement for each of our business centers, so that you can see a little bit better. Because right now, the way that it's tracked in the system and the way that it's in the audit, annual audit report, is by fund. And so it shows everything lumped together with the bridge and all the rental properties and the waterfront, and everything is all lumped into one fund.
And so what Kevin and I have been working on is splitting that out, because what you really need to know is what areas are basically, at this point, you have to come up with money from somewhere, and it's always been tolls has come in to backfill these ones that you can't charge enough money for, or that just don't have enough revenue to cover their costs. So it will give you some picture of the areas that we're really talking about, because your industrial and commercial properties are doing great. The rents that come in cover the costs, and they should be good to move forward. But some of the other areas, the airport, for example, breaks even or does well on operations. But then when you look at capital, and we get those great 90-10 split grants from the federal government, but coming up with 10% of a $3 million grant is $300,000. And so where's that money going to come from in the future? So those are the kinds of things that we'll be looking at. That's kind of what, when we present this information to you on the 21st, it'll show that much more clearly. You can see each one and where the deficits are.
And that's great. Supported 1,000%, long past due. What I think Heather's trying to tie into is this new sheet of rates. If we adopt these rates, what does it do to that picture in that operating center? How much of a gap is it going to close, or how much more revenue is it going to grow? So it's kind of a forecast of what is that position going to be a year out when you do the next report.
And so on what I'm hoping to bring on April 4th, my intent is to have a 10-year forecast that shows you, and it will have, I hate to even use the term scenario after going to all the bi-state working group meetings, but it will have different options for you and different trajectories. So depending upon it will look at these things, and again, based on where you're having deficits right now, then that can be kind of some focuses on what does that mean in the long run, and goes back to the whole staffing. We want to now kind of get an idea, at least, of, given different storylines, what is the staffing of the port in 7 years, 8 years, 10 years down the road, and where do we end up with all of this? Because decisions you make today can impact that, and so that's kind of, you need that information about everybody's best guess about what's going to happen in the future to make decisions today.
We'll look forward to those.
Thank you.
I compliment what you're doing, just go faster.
Where have I heard that
This
before?
information today.
The other item in here is the memo that Greg and Commissioner Shepherd worked on. That ultimately will be, some version of will be sent to the Urban Renewal Agency is included. So I don't know if there's any feedback on that document.
No, not yet. Greg did a nice job on it. We're just continuing to talk about how best to set this up and start reaching out.
So I believe the Urban Renewal Agency is going to be getting their packet in the next day or two. So if you recall from that original Urban Renewal Agency meeting that I presented to, I was asked to provide two things. One was historical documents for the history of the waterfront Lot 1. And so I did send quite a bit of documentation to the city. It was not to advocate for any of those projects that had failed in the past, but it was only to be shared as history and insight as to where that land has been over the years. But the second one was a memo or a white paper, just kind of wanting to show what our process is moving forward. So I do owe something to the city in the next 24, 48 hours so they can get that in their packets.
Is that meeting Monday next?
That's the 13th.
All right, I'll show up to your meeting next week and chat about that.
And Abigail already distributed all of the documents that you sent to her.
Yes, I think all of the historical documents have been distributed.
We just don't have the package.
It's just the white paper memo piece that we're, just looking for a blessing, and if that looks good, then I can forward that on.
Okay.
So what's in here is ready to send off, or do you want to still?
No, what's in there is just fine, as long as Greg agrees. I think it's just fine. It's intentionally not overly specific, because we're not dictating anything. We're
Yeah.
just, so.
Got it. Okay, thank you for that. Appreciate it. And then with that, I'll just finish up. I'm going to be taking the next 3 days off. It'll be my first time away since taking the position. So Genevieve gets the baton for a couple more days here. Remember that? So,
I do have one
Yeah.
question on your report on page 80. At the very bottom of it, it's actually for John. And there's a bullet talking about Lumen and their efforts of getting their cable fixed on the bridge. And it's been 15 months now since we've started with the problem and no end in sight.
Well, we finally got plans to review and they're in the hands of Kaufman Engineering right now. And they're looking at them. It's actually their second submittal of plans. But basically from the first submittal until now, that's been about 4 months. So getting reaction from them has been, I can't even tell you how many hours I have trying to prod and push on that.
Could you explain a little bit about your statement here that says on page 81, you will continue to stay on top of getting this completed for the safety of our staff and the public crossing of the bridge. What do you mean by that?
That cable comes, they're wound up tight right now, and that's putting extra force on those cables on these arms that stick out. So let's say we get a really bad windstorm and maybe it pulls one of those cables off. Now, maybe my crew or my team is up there working on something in an emergency when that happens. Maybe there's cars on the bridge and that cable comes off and it starts blowing around in the wind. Unfortunately, me and my staff are about the only ones who saw that as being even a potential problem. Even our engineers said they didn't feel that was a huge safety issue, although I argued that till the very end, because I believe it is.
Is this a position that we need to get our legal counsel to write a letter to Lumen that jacks them up, that says you will be liable for any damage or safety issues that come as a result of this cable? You've now been screwing around with this for 15 months. And we got to hold them accountable for a date. And I would say in a letter, I would say you have 2 months to get this thing done, or we're going to start penalizing you of some type. And again, that's up to legal counsel to help us with, but 15 months is totally unacceptable.
I couldn't agree more. And Kevin and I have actually talked about doing just that.
So let's do it.
But well, we've got the plans right now are in our engineers' hands and they're being reviewed. Let's let them have them back. And then when we hand them back to them,
You're being too nice.
well, I can't ask a request to them when we're the ones reviewing the plans right now. So I'm between a rock and a hard place. But as soon as we're through the review, which I expect by the end of this week, then I should be able to go to them and say, here's your plans, what dates?
No. I think, in my humble opinion, I think you need to have a letter ready to go when you give the plans back to them that says you have no more than 2 months to get this thing done.
Okay, I'm all for it. I would love that one off my plate.
If you have any issues, make sure we know about it, then we can take whatever steps.
Sounds great.
Or I may.
Let's make arrangements and make that happen.
Okay, I'll give you a call tomorrow.
We'll just submit that letter right with their plans as we return them.
Okay.
Okay.
We had a lengthy my state working group update earlier. Is there anything else we need to add? Okay. Then we have a couple of action items. John, I think yours is the first one on the bid solicitation.
Yep, we had underwater pier analysis started in July 2022. We found 2 pockets on pier 6 and 8. Our engineers are of the mindset that it needs to be repaired regardless of our time frame for the new bridge. It's just one of those aging things. It's been on a couple of the fracture critical inspections, but no measurements of size or what they were exactly.
just a diver down there saying, it looks like you got a spot that's, but the analysis that HDR did gave us the dimensions of them and a repair plan for them. And their recommendation is that we move forward and get this one taken care of.
John, I have a question on that. So if we move forward with this, on top of what we've done with the cables and the approach ramps and all of that, is it critical for us to go back to the agency that derated our bridge to such a low number and say, we've done all these repairs, can you re-rate us?
They actually, all of our repairs, once we finish them,
You submit them?
HDR turns those into
Okay.
them and those all become part of the history, that living document, that living
Perfect.
history of our bridge.
Okay, just checking.
So-
Thank you.
But they just approved going up and load rating.
Well, yeah, I know that.
That's,
Very.
they're not gonna rate it above that.
No, I'm talking about our little rating number, the one out.
Oh,
of 100.
SUI?
Yeah.
This will affect it.
And just on that note, ODOT will not be using that rating system any longer. It was found not to be accurate.
Okay, good.
And not to give a good description. Our bridge is being compared to a brand new 8-lane bridge in San Francisco.
Mhm.
So,
We've used it very effectively.
yeah, I'm not saying it doesn't speak to the age and the condition of our bridge. I'm simply saying that in their eyes, it doesn't speak to a true health of the bridge.
Okay, good.
So this estimate is $300,000 to do this work.
That's correct.
I read every page of your RFP. I didn't see any scope of work tied to real scope of work. And I think you're pointing that to another document.
Yes.
Are
That's
you
correct.
absolutely sure that you've got that scope of work nice and tight?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Look at you in the eye.
Absolutely.
Huh?
You can't scare me on this one. Let's put it that way. I'm very confident, as I am with every project I bring to the board.
Okay,
And I think my record of running projects demonstrates that.
Any more questions? Would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve issuance of bid solicitation for underwater pier concrete repairs on the bridge.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I,
I as well. Thank you, John.
Thank you, commissioners. Thank you.
And second, is that Kevin?
Yeah, so the next one is the resolution authorizing application to the EDA, which is the Economic Development Administration, Public Works and Economic Adjustment Assistance Grant.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Jen, was this yours?
It's ours.
Okay.
I just heard my name and responded.
There's a lot of collaboration.
You're at home.
So this would be our second application to the EDA, but to a different grant program within the EDA for this project. The budget is changed in the sense that this is a construction only application, and our prior application included the pre-construction activities, architecture, engineering, and all of that. This application is recommended by our regional representative at EDA to be submitted right now. And part of that reason is because of the eligibility criteria. There's a long list, A through J, of eligibility for this. Our only in to this program is that the project is located within an opportunity zone. And the EDA staff in the area expect to get new advice on this program that maybe removes that criteria. So they're urging us to apply construction only as soon as possible before they receive that advice, and we're no longer eligible for these types of funds. We don't meet any of the economic requirements in terms of unemployment rate, per capita income, those sorts of democratic abilities for these programs. The river just doesn't meet those at this time. So this is applying for 981,000 plus for the construction part of that, and it pledges match funding of 2,285,621. So that is what we would be on the hook for to either fund ourselves with our real estate reserves or other grants or some other means, but it has to come from us to complete that project with this grant funding. It is federal money, so there is other obligations that would come with the grant. But this authorization is, you are authorizing us to apply. We would have a second vote to accept if we were awarded the grant contract. So that's what it is.
When do you expect, assuming that we apply for it, when do they make the decision?
There's no deadline on this funding. This is actually a fiscal year 2020 authorization. And they promised that they'll review an application within 60 days and that we would get an answer within 90.
And this is federal funding. So, and 23 is not going to apply to this? Since it's,
23.
or, what's the
Title
bridge?
23?
The
No,
bridge.
Title 23 is specific for.
US DOT.
Okay,
This is commerce.
okay.
But it would come with certain obligations that would increase, for example, or could increase the permitting costs. Because there would be more environmental review required with federal money than would not, so.
So what is your thought on how we would reduce our piece of the 2.285 million, so it doesn't come out of our cash reserves? How would you propose to minimize our involvement?
The short answer is other grants, other local state grants. We've already got $1 million in funding from those grants. If the single property urban renewal district does occur, then that could bring 1.7 million of that 2.28, but it would be reimbursable after certain years of the project being developed and based on the tax generating capability of the eventual development. So that's not a really reliable number to think of, but that's one way to kind of attack that.
So I would suggest that if we go ahead with this, there ought to be kind of a tie into it that over the course of the next 6 months to maximum a year, you report back on what are the grant opportunities that we're chasing to make up and minimize the 2.2.
Any more questions? Somebody can make a motion if they'd like to.
I'll make a motion to approve resolution 2022-2310 authorizing submission of an application for the EDA Public Works and Economic Adjustment Assistant Grant Program and confirming the availability of matching local funds for the road and utility infrastructure project on Lot 1.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I as well. Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Commissioner Strike, anything?
Yeah, this is for Gregor. We spoke about the courtesy car at the airport. You may want to look up Capan, which is Payson, Arizona. They have an online fillable PDF that you can fill out, a good template for us to look at and compare, maybe get you started in the right direction.
Excellent. Thank you, Commissioner.
And also, this is just totally off the wall, but Abigail and Mark are in the room today. And Commissioner Fox made a comment that kind of resonated with me as far as maybe looking at temporary zoning for lot 1 for an RV park for our 3 to 5 window. We have a revenue stream for our own builders to pay for our infrastructure that the port puts out to build lot 1 out. But we have housing and stuff for our
I just did a back of the envelope calculation and very quickly came up with revenue of at least $5 million.
Yeah, so it maybe this be a win-win for both parties here. Maybe a temporary, it sunsets in 5 years or 4 years. And we have a revenue stream to put infrastructure in and nobody else pays for it. And we need spaces for the workers. It could be a win-win.
Thank you. Commissioner Fox.
I just like to give another kudos to Debbie and her staff on getting our financial picture straightened out. I know it's a hornet's nest, but it is super critical for us to be able to make any kind of decent decisions to get that thing fixed. So I applaud you. Secondly, if you look at Mike and the HNTB team, if you've gone to the new website for the new bridge, if you haven't, I'd suggest you go take a look at it. I went through every page of it and it looks really good. It's a sharp picture of what that project's doing and good job there.
It's all JLA. So.
I'd like to add to that, as far as Deb, as far as making the simplicity of P&Ls, extremely helpful. That would be, it's a way to go.
Thanks.
Put it in layman terms.
Commissioner Gary?
I don't really have anything, but I would like to say, I know the port, has in the past had sort of a bad rap. And, it's hard to see like that from the outside, see what everything is happening on the inside with staff. And I just think, especially with the new leadership and everything, I've just seen so many awesome things happening and I'm just proud to be a part of it.
Commissioner Chapman?
Piggybacking off of what Commissioner Strike said, Greg, we have an enterprise rental company here. And they relocated, they used to be down on Cascade and now they're up on Tucker. What, couldn't we make that a win-win situation where they relocate maybe to the airport and they rent some cars to the people but they have some available for an idea that someone brought that up to me and you just jogged my memory. I'm thinking about that.
I think they deal with the Dallasport right now. I think Enterprise does have a contract with the Dallas Airport.
That's it.
Thank you, everybody, for all your hard work. Directives to staff. Who's
got
keeping
this.
track? Errol.
Okay, so number one, with the marina planning, we will do a decision tree with the port office and maintenance, start work on that. The second one is to make that list interactive with the commission and add in any of your comments to that. And to also add property acquisition to that list, we will do. The third one is on the master list. Just so you know, that list, that's actuals right now. So from there, the thought was to use that and then add the columns to it as building blocks. So what you're looking at there, that's where we're at. So this was just the starting point of having a spot for all of you to look at, okay, this is what we've got. And then your comments were spot on because that's how we thought we would be using that as a tool. And we appreciate your feedback on that. We'll add those columns and move forward with using that. And then the fourth was a letter to Lumen from legal and John, get rolling on that.
Cover 'em?
And I think there's one more for Genevieve on the grant. To work the grant with minimizing cash out by other grants, identifying it, reporting. So put a target there.
Okay. All right, our next step is executive session, so thank you all for coming tonight, appreciate it.
See, but
Yeah, go ahead. I'll recess regular session and enter into executive session under ORS 1926602E to conduct deliberations with persons designated to negotiate real property transactions, and OR 1926602H to consult with legal counsel regarding current